So the task was, bring these people together. And my experience of bringing people together as a facilitator is to start on the common ground. Like, and everyone has to say, has a say about that common ground. And what the exercise I used is we created a treaty of how we were to be with each other. Some people call it an agreement, a treaty, rules, but rules is a bit much because we rebel against rules. So I just use an exercise for whakawhanaungatanga and got everybody to say what would stop them from participating. And when they fed back and told us what would stop them from participating, the second part of that exercise was, well, I'll fix it. Go and fix that problem. And they came back and said, all kinds of wonderful things, all about relational, drivers. I will feel respected. That I would be I feel part of it, all of that. And as they said that, we wrote up our treaty from the words that they said. So that was the beginning of our relationship together. And everybody had a say. And it was the treaty was the thing that guided us throughout, really. All the technical stuff came in it, and Kelly's great at that. But the binding of everybody's getting to know each other, respecting that there are different views, and there were a lot of different views, but no one really came to blows about it because we had our treaty to fall back on. Yeah, so that was really important to do that.
We we came up with the demographic proportions that we thought felt the most like Porirua. So we tried to, and then we gave a little bit of extra weight, which is what sometimes happens depending on what the question is, to rangatahi. For example, we went 15 and up. Most citizens' assemblies will go 18 and up, but not younger. And then we had some help from the great people at Trust Democracy. It was Koitu, was both, yeah. And we were able to use a free sortition program. So once we had it all set up, it was very surreal sitting in the room with Sharon and Simon and actually pressing the button go on this thing. And the first time we were like, oh, it doesn't quite have the right proportions. And then so it's a fairly technical thing, random stratified sortition. The hardest part of it was getting people to respond. And we actually did a old-fashioned hand delivery campaign of almost 12,000 invitations. And then once people responded to that, we could send them out a survey and say, please fill this out and we'll put you into the lottery.
We did the you know um yeah, everything. We did everything. We did that because a random sortition didn't feel like very community led or relational. So we could have just put all the names into the machine, but we just needed to add that little step because we found that because of our cultures, it didn't feel relational enough. So we did all the footwork for Sharon, to get the word out there to sign up.
The sortition was definitely something that we were a lot more flexible on than any other assembly that I've read about. For example, we didn't meet on the first day. We didn't meet the quota for Pacifica that we had hoped. And so we went out into the community and found people who wanted to participate. Another one was that we invited rangatahi to stay sort of after day two. Day two was all around rangatahi, and that just felt like the right thing to do if they wanted to be there for the rest of it. So yeah, there was some fudging around the sortition, which doesn't normally happen. and not budging. Is that the wrong?
No, I just want to say every adaptation in the name of relationality, A, yielded way better representation of exactly those who typically are underrepresented. B, could be justified. You know, it was always still still randomly chosen right to the very end. Even for those, it was asking people, hey, would you please, put your name forward, so it was very rigorous. And C, I just learned at the Center for Deliberative Democracy last week, someone said, the biggest kept secret is nobody does sortition exactly right everywhere around the world. Yeah, I know, all of that effort, all of that, I know. So the biggest kept secret is actually a misnomer. Everyone adapts, especially in the global south, especially there, where this idea of random, unrelational, like fairness through not having relationships, eh? So that I just wanted to make sure that was on the table.
It's something that we have noticed, an observation that there's a certain type of people who really feel confident about sortition, and it's the people who currently have a lot of privilege and power. So yeah, I'll just leave that there.
So while we were doing our treaty, together, we also this is a little, thing that me and Kelly did after getting some advice. We also asked our group that we would love to get 100% agreement across the line, and we may not get 100%. So is 80% okay, in agreement? And they agreed. So we didn't have to fudge around by, the percentage that would agree in the end to something. We had already set it up that, anything to pass, we needed 80%. Going for 100, but 80% would do. So, and I'm going to hand it now over to Kelly, who did all the hard.
Don't know about that. There was lots of hard work from everyone, including the participants, hugely. Yeah, it was hard work. There were a brief overview of the process. Is that useful?
Sure.
Of the days. So we started with whakawhanaungatanga between the two groups, and a bus tour of Porirua that Ngāti Toa hosted, which everybody loved by the sound of things. I wasn't on the bus, sadly. And then we went into some learning and starting to discuss, and the general process for getting to the recommendations was teasing out bits that were important to people, elaborating on it, and then simplifying it and getting it as close as possible. So the community group, I think, had about 11 recommendations that we went into the shared space to have with Ngāti Toa. And they had done their own set of about 6 or 7, which were framed quite differently, and then we got to exchange those over in the break between the 2 weeks. And then on the final day we all came together and we tried as hard as we could to get the language into, there was some small groups of wordsmithing, big groups of like, what's the approach, and we didn't quite land it, so we agreed to do another half day, which is another innovation that we have used the whole time and is really, I think, something about being Indigenous-led as well, is moving at the speed of trust and doing what needs to be done regardless of the initial timeframes that you had hoped to achieve that in. So yeah, hopefully that. And then we did at the end the thing where when we finally got there, just in case there's any facilitators out there, because this is a really helpful technique, you say, everybody stand up. If you can't live with this, stay standing. And we used it a couple of times. There was a couple of times someone stood up and they talked about what it was. So in the end, I feel like we never really voted. We just agreed the whole way. Yeah. But voting is also a good option. We did vote during the process on different parts of it. Yeah, actually, my dream, as soon as we started talking about this, I was like, we can make a space for this. Like, it really needs, I 100% agree, architecture could really influence the way these things could happen. We chose pātaka because it's not a theatre, it's not an amphitheatre like this. There's different rooms and that kind of thing. Just while it's on the top of my mind, it's sort of like this, the marae, we didn't use takapuahia that often, and that's because they're very, very busy. And also we are missing our incredible Jodie today from Ngāti Toa because she's at a tangi. So a marae would be beautiful. That would have been our probably number one, but it wasn't an option. Pātaka was a really good next option. But yeah, have with my background in architecture, I think there's huge potential for creating spaces where we can facilitate these conversations better. Yeah.
That comes back to the treaty that we created together. And that prepared, although we can ask participants, the reason why I am very strong about, that's our breaking ground and our, where we are all, sit on the same page is that when something goes wrong, we fall back on it. And I always say if something goes wrong in the group or if something's not right, I'll go back. Are we all adhering to what we agreed to? And the group looks after themselves, and because they all agreed to it.
And if Sharon wants to pipe in about the Manaki behind the scenes, potentially before we, just to speak to that question, because there's a lot going on behind the scenes as well.
Yeah, I'll just comment on that. As everybody else said, kia ora, my name is Sharon. I was the person in the background. And as people said before, there were everything I would do differently. But one of the things that I was really proud of is how much we stayed in contact with the participants and that we spoke to the participants before the first assembly day and after every single one as well, just to touch base. And also provided opportunities to support them outside of that. Some of the stuff went online with Q&A just so we could save some in-person time. And so providing support to people around that, opening up other facilities so they could access, touching base with people who had access needs around the presentation of information to make sure that they had everything that they needed and to maintain the relationships so that the people who called them the first time were the people who called them the second, third, fourth, fifth and sixth time as well, just to maintain those connections.
Even the team, Sharon, was as much as possible people who were from, they were also Porirua in a room, so someone that was contacting you had a connection, from where you were coming from.
When we developed the question, we went around as many community groups as we could connect with, particularly in relationship to the environment, but not specifically. There was a lot of like the commerce group and blah, blah, like everyone, scouts and
Lots of groups.
Lots. And through that, we were trying to find the common ground. What is it that everybody is concerned with? And we came up with the question that way, which we took back to the Leaders Forum. The question ended up being, how do we connect and respond as our climate changes? Yeah, living in Porirua's changing world together. How do we connect and respond as the climate changes? And as we did that exercise, we also teased out all of the kōrero that were most important to the Porirua, to the community in Porirua, and built these themes around kai. Health was one of them. Health and well-being was one of them.
Responding to disasters.
Resilience response. And then we started connecting with experts based on all of that work and starting as local as possible and reaching out further. And everybody that we talked to was really, really happy to be involved. Basically, it was awesome.
But you were saying that hearing from those experts, what they brought into the room was gave reason for, you said something about they were leaving in solutions.
I think we knew that, this is just coming back to me, we knew that we didn't have capacity to deal with the mental health crisis that is fully realizing the climate corruption situation. So we didn't go there. And we tried to stay with, what are people doing? I mean, that's the question, right? How do we respond and connect as a climate changes? It's an entry into having the discussion. And yeah, it's something that keeps me up at night, is when everybody, but yeah, different too. We did want to have more things like, we had some quiet zones and things like that, just very practical stuff. But.
What about in the Waitangi? Is there anything that comes to mind in that question, that what was there to help address did anxiety come up, or what was there in terms of supporting you to be able to have some pretty difficult, dealing with difficult topics?
One of our, what would you call it, workshops in the Waitangi was, to me, it felt very linked to like, how do you feel about the climate? And that is inherently like kind of the future thinking. There's like anxieties, there's often fearfulness. And for our Taiwohi, it was often like, my homes are sinking and how can I adapt to that? What does that mean to me? And we explored it through art, through poetry. And I felt really powerful for them to, use their own voices, their own whakaaro to put it to paper and then read it aloud and be like, I can take ownership in what I'm doing now and what I see, and also what I can just talk about with my family, with my family. Anything else?
I think Santino said it perfectly, but I just wanted to mention that I experienced Cyclone Gabriel, and that's what truly lit a fire in me to keep on doing this kaupapa. So if it wasn't for that happening to me, I actually don't think I would have been a part of this. It's when a disaster happens when you really want to find a solution. And since I had to relocate to Porirua from Tokomaru Bay, that's when I was like, whoa, it's happening here too. I don't want a big disaster to happen here. Imagine if there were so many people in this town experiencing it just like my hometown did, and we only had about 200 people, and it was chaos, true chaos. And Porirua has a much bigger population than 200. And so it shouldn't take a disaster for us to make change and find solutions now.
Kelly's right. We just didn't have enough time to really deep dive into the stress, the fear, the mental health issues that come with the subject. And so what we did was we really tried to focus on hope. The hopeful, the action that brought hope, and when you are action orientated, and it's such a huge issue, isn't it? It's huge, it's worldwide, it's everywhere. You've got to have your team with you and that grow. It's a movement. This is about a movement and that gives people hope. Mm-hmm. And I felt that the people in our community forum, that in the beginning there was a little bit of confusion and a little bit of shyness, and at the end of it they felt so much more helpful because they were part of this journey. And so that is the way that we dealt with it. That's how we dealt with it.
We aimed for 50 in the community-wide space. The Mana Whenua group, they had a different system that they were using, and they had between 20 and 30 people maybe coming into their space, up to 40, I'd say, on the last day. The rangatahi.
That being 40 and 40.
40 and 40.
Yeah, but different people in the Mana Whenua group.
Yeah.
But the same numbers overall.
Oh, yeah, cool. And then must have been at least, it was about 40 at the Wānanga, 40, yeah. And then maybe a few less that came on the second day, and 25 on the second day. Funding. Yes, she's our funding manager.
Person. So everything but $10,000 was non-government, and the $10,000 came in the last 2 weeks, and that funded the videographer. And that was from Wellington Regional Leadership Committee. So that's GW adjacent. It was about 225,000 all up. The largest chunk of money was from J.R. Mackenzie, and we were awarded 85K from them, 20K from Wellington Community Fund in October 2021, and we rolled that funding over 3 times before we could actually push the button and go, because we were operating at the speed of trust. There was funding from an invite-only lotteries fund, from COGS, from NECAL, from George McCarthy, it's a smaller one, and funding from Vic for evaluation and research. And part of that funding from Vic also doubled the daily stipend to $100 a day per person. And that was $26,000 of that funding was just daily stipend. But yes, no government funding and philanthropic. And there was a 3-year gap between the first funding and the next funding we got. It was a long 3 years.
And an extraordinary amount of volunteer work and paid roles from Ngāti Toa that weren't included in the funding that we collectively created, and also some paid time from Wesley. A lot of paid time from Wesley. A lot of resource from Wesley, Enviro schools, to Papataiao. Like, there's so many organisations that put resource into this through people power, and the council, the Porirua City Council as well, have walked alongside us the whole time. They printed everything, and it's leaving a bit of in kind from the City Council. Kia ora. We had a pre-plan, but we didn't need to enact it. And that actually came way, way, way back when we were talking about what does a Te Tiriti-based structure look like. We identified extremism as a potential risk factor for deliberation. And at that point, we came up with basically a 3 strikes rule. So with the treaty, as Makarita said, Makarita was really good at just pulling us all back to it and saying, remember our treaty? Are we all adhering to this? Is this kōrero, respecting that? And as Ifupo said, people are holding themselves in that space a lot of the time.
So we didn't really have to bring it up as a remember our treaty or anything. We most of us, we all got on really well, and there was space for debating. You were allowed to debate in safe, respectful ways, because that is what we agreed to. And we also agreed that we will value, that people have opinions, and there were strong opinions, but they weren't strong over anyone. Yeah.
One of the things that was on the treaty that one of the participants added was focus on the problem, not the person. And I think that was a really useful one that is enabled, that. So the treaty was really powerful, and it helped everyone to know how to be in that space.